Hey, what's going on, y'all? Kevin Brenner here as I clap into the microphone. Guys, if you're a podcaster, don't do that. Just realize that. But you know what? I've been doing it 290 times, so whatever. Uh, Today's guest is very exciting. It's we're going to be talking about that beginning phase, that getting started in real estate investing and what that really means and make it a little bit more relatable because lately we've had some guests on here that are like absolute just rock stars. You've just having thousands of units and been doing it for 25 years, and that's all fine and dandy. But for those of you who are listening to this who are like, God, I just want to get started, or I just got my first house, or I'm house hacking, or I'm accident to the landlord, or I'm trying to get my second place under contract, something like that. Today's guest is going to be able to provide that relatable, real life military real estate investor story. His name is Nolan Chandler. He is a Marine and stationed at Camp Lejeune, and we're going to talk about the beginnings and the story and make it really, really fun. So tune in for this one. It's going to be a lot of fun. Nolan, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate you belittling me, saying I'm not a huge investor like the rock stars.
There you go. That's what I like to do. I like to put people in their place. No, that's not true, man.
Yeah,
Uh, it's funny though. I'm reading The Gap and the Gain right now, and as I've somewhat progressed through the real estate investing kind of my own career, I'm always comparing myself to that other person, and I realize
right.
that is flawed thinking.
Yeah,
If you haven't read The Gap and the Gain, you listen to this podcast, go and get that book because it's fantastic. We'll even link it in the show notes here for you. But what I'm realizing is that's called gap thinking. I'm not thinking about the accomplishments that I've already made. And as a newbie real estate investor or a seasoned real estate investor, it doesn't really matter. You got to live in the gain. You got to live in a space and a headspace where you're not always chasing, but you're able to once in a while look back and look around you and say, "Wow, I built something really cool." And it starts off one house at a time, one investment at a time. So, Nolan, with that in mind, why don't we do a little bit of introduction for the people for yourself, and we'll talk about your military background too.
yeah, sure. So obviously, yeah, name is Nolan Chandler. I came into the Marine Corps 2019. Been stationed at Camp Lejeune. It's my first and only permanent duty station so far. Originally from Southern California, it's where I met my wife. We both went to law school together, so we got married shortly thereafter. Then I came to the Marine Corps, and so I'm a judge advocate in the Marine Corps because of that. So that's just a very broad view of who I am coming into this.
Oh, that's awesome. So here's a quick question just off the bat for you because I've had a lot of people ask me this. They're active duty and they're going to maybe settle some real estate affairs or settle something or like is there something that judge advocates or jags on base can do in the real estate realm from an investment standpoint, not as like a real estate attorney obviously, but like something is there maybe like asset protection, or is it more just like estate planning and stuff like that? Like where do you guys fall for that kind of services?
Yeah, so at Camp Lejeune, I know it's across like naval installations as well, army installations, but there's legal assistance, and so that's dealing with basically Marines, dependents, retirees, and oftentimes it revolves around consumer protection and then some landlord-tenant issues. So, like you said, it's not so much actual like uh, as a real estate attorney, so to speak, but there are issues where service members come in and their landlord's taking advantage of them, or they're not following the SCRA by allowing them to PCS if everything's actually set the way it should be. So we can kind of assist in that. And then oftentimes, service members that are young, they want to go get that expensive car, whatever it is, but the APR is like, what is it, the limit? 36, I don't know what it is. But anyway,
Whatever, yeah,
um,
insane.
yeah, and so oftentimes they'll be taken advantage of in certain ways, and so then there's a little bit that we can do to help. Sometimes we can't fully rectify it, but there's certain things we can do to maybe help mitigate the harm. But that's basically it, and then a little bit of estate planning. So that's kind of what we can do on the judge advocate side.
Okay. Well, that's just good information to know for folks who are active duty, because I mean, I think I was visiting. I remember when I was at Hunter Army Airfield, I go to the JAG. I had to get something. Oh, there was like it was like a Georgia. It was a tax form or something like that for the state of Georgia that allowed me to, if you were serving in the state of Georgia, you were able to defer or avoid some sort of vehicle tax, excise tax, or something like that. But you had to get it signed by the JAG. So go in and take advantage of those services and have the conversations, even when it comes to estate planning. If you have those introductory conversations, it could be just getting you in the right headspace and mindset. So use people like Nolan
Yep,
because they're there for you. Ultimately, Jags are there for you, right?
free of charge.
Uh, free of charge. Exactly. Love that. All right, so Nolan, you're a lawyer. You're married. You got two kiddos, and you're a real estate investor. Tell us a little bit about this because not many lawyers I know are also real estate investors. A lot of them are so bogged down in their work that they're working 50, 60 hours a week that they're like don't even have time to think about this. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, I agree with that. So while trying to keep it relatively short, we bought our house in 2020, and it was just strictly just to buy the house. It wasn't from an investor's perspective at all. So we were talking about renting it, talking about selling it when we leave, whether it's to stay in the military full time to PCS or whether I'm getting out. And so fast forward to 2021, I forget what book I was reading at the time or what I was listening to, but I come home and I go into the living room with my wife, Marie, and I tell her, Marie, I want to buy an apartment complex. And so, yeah, so she, instead of either just kind of laughing me out of the room or getting kind of upset at me, like, like, what are you thinking? Why would you, too risky. She just looks at me for a little bit, taking it all in. And then she just calmly, asks like, okay, well, tell me more. And I was kind of surprised to hear that response from her off the bat, but,
You had like all your defenses up. You're like, because it's gonna make good cash flow, and like you
yeah,
had this whole argument, like the lawyer argument.
yeah, I did. I mean, and so it kind of shocked me, but yeah. So she just calmly asked, like, "Tell me more." And so I just kind of gave her the wave tops of like, "Look, I don't know anywhere near what I probably need to know, obviously, going into this, and but this is just this is the big picture what I am kind of thinking." And so we really started delving into like, okay, what does this involve? What is being a real estate investor like? Whether it's commercial, real, residential, what is it? We started getting into it, and then in later in 2021, we actually started looking for commercial properties because, I mean, apartment complex, commercial, but I wasn't sure I could get a large building. A lot of people told me, hey, you might need to like wait a little while because even if you were to start off right away, no lender is going to want to lend you with no experience. And, so there were some of those hurdles. And I was okay. So I got with a real estate agent. We were looking around the local area for commercial properties. And then ultimately, she came across one that one of the agents at her firm had for a listing, and it ended up being a short-term rental. And so she's like, "I know this is a commercial, but I want to just throw this in here just in case you might be interested." And then I don't know if you want to kind of stop there and continue, but like that's
I
kind
love
of
it.
yeah.
I love it because a lot of, as many of our listeners know, we recently launched the Military Short-Term Rental Academy, and today, just by happenstance, I happen to write the 5 top STR tech must-haves that you must have in your short-term rental. And I wrote a whole blog about it and released it just to our short-term rental academy students, just as a I don't know, surprise and delight kind of a thing, because I like to do that from time to time. But it was, we're constantly, I operate short-term rentals. I'm in the, and I find it very profitable. But it's interesting that you went from kind of like this commercial mindset, and then someone's like, well, slow your roll. Let's get you some experience first, which is good advice. Honestly, it is. And let's turn you into a business operator, because as a short-term rental operator, the thing that I stress so much is that you are entering the hospitality business. It is not a set it and forget it, collect the rent check kind of a thing. It's a business, so you have to think about it like that. But no, dude, I love that. So where was this short-term rental?
So the short-term rental, if anyone's familiar with Southeast North Carolina, it's Surf City.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's about 30 minutes from where we live in Sneads Ferry. And like you said, it's definitely not a set it, forget it. But what I ultimately came to learn is we had a property manager in place. And I think property managers can be good. If you got a good one and it works for you, that's great. This one in particular, long story short, was not good for us. So I ended up having to, excuse them. And then,
Excuse them.
yeah,
I fire people. I guess you
yeah,
excuse them.
yeah,
May I
just
be excused? Yes, you may. Take your stuff.
yeah, I did want to say it like that, but yeah, that's ultimately what happened. And I was nervous going. I was like, how am I going to manage this on my own? Like, what do I even do? And I happened to go to a local meetup, and I ran into a guy. It was both our first times there, and he had some short term rentals on the island here, and he asked me, and I told him what happened, and then he said, well, you can just basically operate yourself and not have to do that much. I mean, you will have to do something, but it's not going to be like you're there every day. So what he offered was like, hey, look at some of these apps and sync them together. And that
Hmm.
honestly does like, I mean, I don't want to be too, but 99% of the work is done for you already. I have to make sure that, unique messages get answered. If they have questions, coordinate with cleaners here and there and stuff. But I mean, overall, it is completely taken off by the apps. And so I think that's what's really allowed me to invest, but still have more time to spend with my family and work. And of course, I do have to spend some time with it. But it was just like, wow, the more you get out there and meet people, talk to people, the more you learn. I mean, you can just start growing exponentially.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the power of the network. Your network. You're the average of the five people you hang around with most. I've said that probably a billion times on this podcast, but it's true. And you're being just in that, like having the I don't know, initiative, I'll say, to even go to a RIA meeting, because you were like kind of in a hard place and you're like, okay, well, what do I do? Let's just go to a networking meeting. And I think the biggest thing is a lot of investors, whether they're new investors, whether they're experienced investors, they have a problem swallowing that humble pie and saying, listen, I got a problem. And if you have that one time courage to go and express your internal vulnerability and say, I don't know everything, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
you raise your hand, other people will come to your aid, and then you'll realize that, wow, it's not that hard. And none of it is really that difficult. So that's the powerful part. And I think that will hopefully motivate people who have been under analysis paralysis listening to this podcast. Like, I want to get in, but I'm scared because it's going to be too hard, whether it's short-term rentals or not. Hopefully that gets them one step further along their journey. So Nolan, this a mixed use commercial property, or was this just a straight short term rental?
It's just straight short term. It was a single family residence. It's 2 streets back from the beach, but I mean, if you are on the back deck, you can have a peekaboo view of the ocean, and you can definitely see the dunes. But yeah, it was. We searched for, I don't know. I think it's probably the 10th or 11th property, and this was during like the height of the sellers market. I mean, this is when I was hearing from people like asking price $30,000 over asking price, waiving all contingencies. I mean, just everything. And so we were kind of taking a lot of rejections, one after another. And then finally we get to this one, and we thought it was good. And the seller actually just agreed, and accepted the asking price offer, and even gave some concessions afterwards, which we were kind of blown away by. Um, but I think overall it's been a very good property for us. It's not like 100% updated, like the newest and all the bells and whistles, but it's not totally old. It's just have some good updates, and it's a good stable property for us last year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Any lessons you'd like to share just about short term rentals and what you've learned over the last year, just being an operator?
Yeah, I think first I would start with just how to even get into it, really, because I mean, I was like, as I told you, we were kind of looking at commercial properties, and then she kind of just, by the way, here's a short term rental. I don't know if you're interested, and we are like, oh yeah, sure. Like, I knew what Airbnb and Verbo was, like just kind of being in the world. You're like, oh yeah, you can kind of,
Being on
yeah,
Earth. Yes.
like it's like, okay, instead of going to a hotel, you rent someone's house for 2 days. Okay, so I knew what it was, but from an operator standpoint, like absolutely nothing. So once we started getting those listings, my wife and I started to kind of read a bunch of articles and listen to things and start to get our heads around it. I think one of the lessons learned, why I'm saying this is, I think it worked out good for us. Like it just, I mean, luck is part of the equation. It's like timing, work ethic, all that great. But
Sure.
I think part of this was luck, because it ended up being a great property for us, good deal, and I ended up learning fast enough to make it work. Whereas if I would have taken longer, maybe it would have been not as good of a deal. But I think that if you are going to go do something, have that balance of do enough research, like make sure that you know what you're doing, but at the same time, don't just do a ton of education and then never take action, because it's worthless at that point. But that'd be the recommendation for people going forward is don't just kind of fall into something like I did. This was a like kind of an example of like it just luckily worked out, but I think I should have probably taken a little more time, because I could have made better decisions earlier on, and we could have had an even better year. I think we had a good year, but it could have been an outstanding year had I done the correct things earlier rather than learn them a little bit later in the process, because I didn't start early enough in my education. Um,
Yeah. I'm gonna pause you here. I really want to dig
sure.
and I because these are the things that we gloss over in these podcasts, where it's like, oh yeah, I made some mistakes, but I learned from them, then it was all good. Let's talk about, let's peel the onion back one more layer, maybe two more layers, uh, and talk specifically some of these problems. And we could use this short-term rental as a case study because regardless whether it's short-term rental or long-term rental, it was your first kind of investment deal outside of your primary residence,
Right.
right? Which, I'm sure you'll convert to a rental. We'll talk about that later. But ultimately, this was kind of your first go in real estate investing. And you know, mentally, were you scared?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can lose a ton of money. I mean, that's just straight and simple, you
Sure.
know? So there's that financial risk that like my wife and I, I mean, I don't want to say we're old or young. I don't want to offend anybody on either side, but we're in our early 30s or were at the time. And I know that like if you invest in your early years, it's like the theory is you have so much time to make it up if you make mistakes. But on the other hand, it's like, but we're trying to get things situated for our family. So if we lose like most, if not all of our money, it's like, oof, like not a good situation. So we had to weigh that, risk reward balance. And, we ultimately thought like, look, we need to make this happen. But along the way, yes, we were nervous that it wasn't going to work or what happens if this happens. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny how our minds work, and I was recently thinking and writing about this. The innate fight or flight that each of us have. It's built. It's hardwired into our human nature. Back when there were cavemen and cave women running around hunting and gathering and all that stuff, and they turn the corner and oh my God, there's a bear. Do we run or do we try to fight it? Well, normally we run. But when we come back to, snap back to reality, and we're looking at these first world problems, that hardwired human nature is still there. And when we're stuck in a deal analysis phase, or we got something goes wrong with a deal, our mind just instantly, it literally stacks up all of the negative thinking, and we keep it in our head, and that echoes around in our head, and that negativity creates self-doubt, and that doubt just, it wants us to run. It's literally, it's our mind protecting us. That's what it's doing. And for, to be able to step back and see and understand, okay, I'm feeling this way because I'm feeling nervous about this deal, or I'm feeling, I'm feeling scared about this deal, or anxious, or what have you, because my mind is full of adrenaline, and pumping me full of doubt, and negative feelings. You'll be able to take a step back, look objectively at it, and then go and say, hold on, does this even make, is this a good financial investment? Does it make sense? And if it does, then carry on. There's going to be problems. There always is. No real estate transaction is ever smooth, even the ones that they say are smooth. They're just not.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, it's a valuable asset and it's trading hands. Just things
Yep.
happen. So it's I just wanted to bring up that mindset piece, and remind our listeners that um, you know everyone's got fear of the unknown. The only way to make the fear of the unknown known is what? Through education, right? Educate yourself. So talking more about that, where did you guys said you started kind of reading articles, blogs? Did you end up did you take like a course, or did you how did you get educated on the short-term rentals enough to be confident enough to know that, like, hey, this is going to work? Or was it just like kind of a self-education process?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say we ended up ever being confident until a little bit later on. So that piece was missing. But we didn't go to any courses. We didn't do that. But we did was we read like just a ton of articles. And we listened to some. I don't know if it was YouTube or if it was just maybe some podcasts. I can't remember. But we did that. And then going to the local meetup. Once I met that guy, just towards the very beginning, I kind of just connected with him, and I was asking him a ton of questions, and he was really
Yeah.
kind enough to take the time to help out. And I think that's what's really great about real estate investors. And maybe it depends on asset classes. I don't know, but I mean, I think more or less we're all here to help each other, because it's not
Mhm.
like, oh, it's all mine. It's like there's plenty to go around. It's not you getting that house over there is not going to affect whether I can get, so there's no like hard feelings to it. So it's just like, hey, as long as someone's time allows, and they want to give that, and I offered to give them coffee or beer, just sit down, just to exchange something of value to him at least. But he definitely helped guide me, almost like a little personal coach for a little bit to get it set up. So all those combined, that was what we did. Was that enough? I think, like I said, luckily it was this time. But I think had it been slightly different circumstances, I probably should have invested in some type of a course, or I mean, maybe something like, a few other books maybe, but that's what we
Sure.
did to get this started. And we've been learning a lot along the way, but yeah, that was what we initially did.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about it, again, taking the initiative and having that mentor in the space, because not everyone can get that. Not everyone has the time to go to these RIAs or make these connections or do that. Ultimately, if if you're considering any type of educational course, whether it's ours, whether it's someone else's, I don't care. Just know that if the course is worth its salt, it's going to fast track you, and it's going to identify those biggest pitfalls that are in front of you and help you just sidestep over them. Now, it sounds like, Nolan, you kind of had that in you read the articles, you did some self education, you were listening to podcasts, you met this guy who was, like you said, gracious enough to help you out, and he probably identified some of the pitfalls, and maybe you got lucky and you just kind of, I don't know, flew over some other ones.
Yeah.
Like hopped over that one. But sometimes that's just how the game goes. And then you look back in hindsight and you're like, wow, I'm definitely glad I didn't do that. But at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know, and you have to educate yourself, and you have to take that seriously. It's part of the learn phase in the ADPI triad, right? Learn, network, take action. So when we're talking specifically about this short-term rental, what were some of the biggest issues that you've had to overcome in the past year from an operator standpoint?
I would say initially there was an inspection and some things were brought up. And of course, money was tight in the beginning. So I was kind of like, it's okay. Some of those things came back to bite us that ended up having to be fixed later. So
Like what? Like
lay
what?
it on
Lay it
you. All
on
right.
me,
So
man.
one of them, there was an electric meter on the outside, and apparently it was very corroded, and I don't know what else was wrong with it. But anyway, that was mentioned on the inspector report, and I'm like, that's not a now problem.
Eh,
Nope. Well, it ended
yeah.
up being a now problem just like a month later, so not really now, but and so we got a letter from the city that was like, hey, if this isn't fixed in whatever 14 days or whatever it was, we're gonna have to shut off electricity to the property. And I'm like, well, that's probably not the best thing because we have guests that are checking in the next, whatever during the stay. So I'm like, I got to figure out who to get fast because you can call an electrician, but oh, guess what? They're booked out for the next 60 days. So I'm just like, Lord Almighty. And finally, I was able to get somebody. He went out there, fixed it fairly quickly. I don't know if it was an appropriate price or not, but at the time, it was kind of like, look, I don't have a choice. So, and he probably
Yeah.
knew that based on my timeline that I gave him. So anyway, but he fixed it. I contacted the city to come out. They inspected it, got it all good. So that ended up being okay. But that was one of the little lessons learned that I was like, if it seems like it should be taken care of, probably just take care of it initially and don't let it be a problem later on. Because if I had to tell those guests, sorry, one, that's lost revenue, and two, they probably are not going to have the inclination to want to stay with you again if you were, cancel it. So yeah, anyway, that's just a little example of, you know,
No, I think that's really really helpful for our listeners, because my kind of rule of thumb when doing physical due diligence on whether it's a small multi, single family, whatever, on a property, is focus on the capital expenses. Like when you're looking at, you get an inspection, right? You get an inspection report. Focus on the big stuff like roofs, hot water heaters, HVACs, electrical, plumbing. Those are like those are the things that are going to really set you back. Like, oh, the door jam is kind of chipped, and like all those little ticky tack things. Like, yeah, I mean, if you want to fix it, you can. But the big stuff is really, the bones, if you will, of your house. That's the stuff that you want to focus on, because that is going to, cause you the most problems. But most of the time, that also has the biggest price tag associated with it. So you can mitigate up front and say, hey, Mr. Seller, I love this property, but this electrical meter is from 1943 and we need to update it. So like, and then there's some things that you just can't control. Like you said, Nolan, it, like a month after you purchase, a month after you went, meh, that's a future Nolan problem. The future came and smacked
yeah,
you in the face. I mean, shoot, the same thing happened to me in one of my quadplexes. Literally the day after
of
I
course.
closed, lightning storm comes through, lightning strikes the tree branch falls off, hits the power line, rips the power cord out of all four of the units, and it was like a $4,000 fix. And I was like,
Yeah.
And then and of course I call the insurance company and they're like, well, we don't cover wind and hail. And I was just like, it was an act of God, so we won't cover it. And I was like,
Uh,
sweet. Uh, but I was just like, oh my God. So sometimes things just happen. But you know, carrying on with this conversation, was there anything more like operationally significant that you learned from being just a short-term rental operator that you maybe changed your business around or anything like that?
yeah. Well, one thing is being new at this. I mean, at some point, there are just some things you're just learning on the fly. And some people might laugh if I say this because it's like so basic. But when I was getting the cleaners lined up and handyman, I just, as long as they were willing to work and I liked the price and I liked who they were, great. Okay, let's set up a relationship, little contract, fine. And then when it came down to it, at the end of the year, I was getting ready for tax season. And so I'm like, hey, I need to give you a W-9. I forgot to give this to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say who it was because, we don't want to, but this person was like, hey, I can't do that. And I was like, okay.
I don't have a social
so,
security number.
so,
Is that it?
so I was like, okay. So I talked to my CPA and, long story short, it was okay, but it could cause problems. And so, had I just done even basic research on like, how are you operating this business is, give your give your W-9s to your subcontract or your contractors, at the beginning of the relationship rather than the end. And, so that was one thing as an operator is like, I learned that along the way. So hopefully, yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, that's a huge lesson. And I did that too. In my first year, I was like, I had all the contractors lined up, and I got W-9s from most of them. Then I forgot there was one handyman because I rotate handyman, and he did more than $400 worth of work or something, and I was just like, oh God. And then the guy just ghosted me forever. And not only did he ghost me, he blocked my
Oh,
phone number. So finally, I talked to my accountant and I was like, listen, like, I can't get in touch with this guy. Whatever happens, like, I have documented evidence of emails, text messages, the whole thing. So whatever, and what I think was happening was because it was all under the table. Like, he wanted cash and so I keeping track of your vendors, as they're called, is really important. And if you use QuickBooks like I do, or some sort of accounting software in your short term rental business, you can literally just add that information, their address, name, their business name, their EIN or SSN, whatever they use. You can add that right to it, and it will automatically create the 1099s and e-file them for you. It's like $4 per vendor or something
dang.
like that. So it's like super cheap, and it does it all for you. So as you're going through the year, so I think a good best practice is before you pay someone. So someone does the work before you pay them. If it's over, I think it's $400 is the threshold. If it's over that threshold, then they have to fill out a W-9 or they do not get paid. And be upfront even before they start the work and say like, hey, I'm a legitimate business and you're going to have to fill out a W-9. And if someone says, oh, I can't do that, then find someone else who
Yep.
will. Um, these lessons learned are gold, man. They're absolute gold because so many people just don't think about that when they're setting up any type of business, even in
Right.
short term rentals. So I love that. One more lesson. One more lesson for
Let's see. So I think, like you said, it's a hospitality service here. Um, I think at some points, some of the guests, they said things that were just not true for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, the cleaners can confirm, I can confirm. Logically, it doesn't make sense. Um, but I think you got to weigh like what's the complaint versus what's worth just like having either saving a bad review or gaining a great review. And so I think that sometimes you got to really make sure that you're weighing that adequately. And I may have kind of not done that at the beginning, but it wasn't major or anything. But obviously, if something is drastically wrong, like you need to make sure that it's taken care of. And if that means telling the guests that they're wrong, like you got to do it. But I do think that you got to make sure that you got to be conscious that it's a hospitality business, and you got to make sure that they're taken care of, and ultimately even refunding them like a few $100s, right? That you're like, gosh, that's $300 of rent. Well, look, in the end, that could be thousands gained on the back end if they stay again, if they refer others to you, right? So, as a business person, I had to kind of learn that and not always go with either who's the cheapest for the contractor or oh, well, this is going to be $200. That's on you, guest. It's like, no, no, look, like, pay them, or, be like, hey, I got it. Don't worry about it. Let them enjoy their experience. And then maybe they'll come back again multiple times, refer you. So those are some of the lessons learned as an operator.
Yeah, yeah. God, that's so true, and that's happened so many times. Where, I mean, it just happened to me the other day, this past weekend. I had a guest in there in the house, and on Saturday they call and they tell me, "Hey, both toilets are clogged," and I was like,
What a
"Wow."
coincidence.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, but this is a Saturday. I got to call an emergency plumber. It was
Mm,
$842 to get both toilets unclogged. So I was like, hey, I was, I've learned enough that like, hey, you got to have functioning
mm,
bathrooms in your house. So the guest was super cool, and they were like, they waited around for the plumber and all of this stuff because I'm sure they had things to do on
mm,
their Saturday, right? They waited around. The plumber showed up, did super professional, did his thing, whatever. So at this point, I'm like, okay, well, I just gonna have to eat that bill. That's gonna suck. But hey, listen, what can you do? So fast forward, the guest checks out. My cleaners call me and say, hey, your basement's flooded. And I was
oh,
like, come again? It caused a sewer backup. So it wasn't the toilets that were clogged. The main sewer line was clogged, which caused the toilets to be clogged. So call the same plumber over. He comes over, he digs into the sewer line, and he pulls out feminine
that you're not
hygiene
supposed to
products,
flush.
brand
Yeah.
that you're not supposed to flush, that are right down there, and they were looked pretty dang new. And he's like, I know that this is the problem, and I can also tell you that these are relatively new, and it probably happened within the last 3 days. And the guest was there for like 4 days or 5 days or something. So it was a whole thing. It cost me another $400. So now I'm in this for almost $1,300. This thing to get fixed, and of course the clean. And then the next guest comes in and they're complaining that it smells musty downstairs. So what do? I give them their whole cleaning feedback because I was like, hey, here, $165, take it back, because what am I going to do? I'm not going to argue with them. Of course it smells musty, like literally, like poop just came up through the floor. Like,
Yeah.
like what do like, I can't argue that. But the point is that I had to eat those costs. But the silver lining is, get your evidence. I had the plumber take copious amounts of photos and videos and the whole thing because I knew I was going to file an insurance claim. This guest stayed on Airbnb. I filed an air cover request within 24 hours. All the money back in
Nice.
my
Okay.
account because the guest, that I was able to prove that the guest did this. And is this guest going to leave a good review? Of course not. But there's no, you can always fight those retaliatory reviews. I think Airbnb won't even let them, if they cause an air cover damage request, they won't even let them leave a review. So it's there's a lot of things that you can do, but don't be stingy. Understand that even if you're in the hospitality and the short-term rental business, you're in it for
Yep.
the long game. You really, really are. And it's not just one guest, it's that month's guest or that season's guest. And one bad guest could really hurt you, or one bad review, excuse me, can really, really hurt you. So you got to weigh,
Mm,
is it
yep.
worth it?
Exactly.
So I love these. I love that lesson, man. It's super powerful. All right, so you got the short term rental. Real quick, now what? You're still with
Selective
active
duty for
duty,
at
right?
least the next. Well, my EAS is 9 August, but I'll be transitioning out of Camp Lejeune
Mhm.
around mid May. So got a little bit left on active.
Okay. So you got a little bit left on active, and then you're. I assume you're going to turn your current home, not the short term rental, the current residence. Is that going to
Yes, we
become
intend
a
on
rental
doing
again?
that. We're in the works of trying to get. We actually have a realtor coming out today to kind of just scope it out so that when she goes to show it, she already has an idea of the layout and stuff. But yeah, so we're in the process of getting that set up and hopefully have it listed in the next month or so.
Are you going to do long
For the
term, mid term,
for
short
this
term?
one, I think we're gonna do long term just because it's not far from the south gate here, the Sneeds Ferry Gate, and then I guess it could work as a midterm or short term, I suppose. But I think at the moment at least, we'd have to totally furnish it. Which for this size house, I don't know if it's gonna be like 20 or $1,000. And I know there's ways to make it work, of course, but I think for right now, we're just comfortable having it as a long term rental. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And then I'm just thinking personally, I'm like, oh man, Camp Lejeune. You know what you could do, just spitballing, you can go and rent it long term to someone who's going to operate it as a short term rental via
Yep.
arbitrage. Let them do the furnishing for you, and you take instead of renting it for, I don't know how much rent goes on, instead of renting it for $3,000 a month or 2,500 a month, you're renting it for four
That
grand
is
a month.
that is totally an
You could
option.
do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go back to that. I bet you go back to that RIA. Talk to your buddy at that RIA and be like, "Yo, you want to operate a short-term rental
Yeah.
right outside the gate of Camp Lejeune, where there's a billion Marine basic
Yep.
trainings happening all the time? Like, dang,
Yeah.
scoop that up in a minute." That's awesome, man. So the
It
plan is to move
is.
back to California then?
I know it's like everyone's moving the opposite direction, right? They're moving out of California. We're like the few moving in, but um, family is really important to us, and we want our kids, the grandkids, to be close to
Sure.
the grandparents, and that's kind of the main reason. And we're from there, so we're familiar with it. It's a good place. Like the weather's awesome. It's just it's a lot more expensive there, and the traffic. But you got to give some because ultimately, what we want is to be closer to family that we've missed for like the last 4 years. Yeah.
Sure, of
Yeah.
course. Family's everything. I love that. All right, man. Well, we're thank you so much for sharing your stories. We're gonna take you into the bonus round right now, which is the same 4 questions I ask
Okay.
each and every guest on
Yep.
this podcast. Are you ready? All right. Question number 1: what book or software has really pushed you
So
forward?
the software, if I have to choose one, I think it'd be Hospitable. I mean, there's
Oh,
others
I
that
love
there's other
that.
apps that we'll link, but to me, how much time would you spend responding to every single guest, and not only just guest, but each time that you need to sound? So to me, we write these messages that are preset, pre-timed. Boom. I mean, that takes off like 80% of your workload right there. So that's tremendous help for me on the short-term rental.
Yeah, it's like $25 a month or something. I have it for 2 rentals. I think
Mhm.
it's based on how many units you have. So I don't know what it is for 1 unit. It's probably like
I think it's 20 or
15 bucks a month.
25, but yeah, it's very inexpensive.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's like 1 to 4 units is like
Yeah.
25, and then 4 and up is something else.
Right.
But it's very inexpensive. The point is, it's very inexpensive and it's extremely powerful.
Mhm.
Integrates with a lot of stuff,
Right.
and I really, really do love it. Awesome. Question number 2: who's your biggest
So
hero in
I would
life?
slightly change it to heroes, only because I want to include both. But for me, it's my parents, my mom and dad. So the reason I have them as my heroes is because they started off very humble, both of them respectively, right? And so they came together as a team, and had it not been for their each partner contributing to the other, like it would not have worked in so many different ways. I mean, I can go probably a half hour and give you the timeline of like what they did at this point, why it worked, and here, and what my dad had to go through, what my mom had, all this stuff, right? But end of the day, it's just they show you what it's like to be resilient, to be hardworking, and they're in a
Mhm.
great place right now because of how hard they worked, and they are just a great example for us. I have 2 brothers, so for their children, they're just the best example you can have of parents, and I can kind of correlate that into real estate investing because it's like you're going to need your team. You need to have an awesome team, right? Each partner has to contribute in order for this to all move forward. And so, to me, in life, I can use them as an example, but obviously translate in real estate, it works too. But yeah, they're my heroes.
That's
Yeah.
awesome, and I love that so much. Um, Question number 3 for you, Nolan.
So for fun, I love to play soccer because that's what I've played my whole life, and other sports, but soccer is kind of like the thing I've done. I do also have my so center
What
midfield
position?
mostly, and then I transitioned to outside towards like the end. But
Okay,
yeah, did you play? It sounds like you're
nice. Oh yeah. I was a
so
goalkeeper
you're
for
the
a long
weirdo.
time.
No, I'm kidding. So
Uh, Yep. I'm the weirdo who takes up a unit on his body. Yes, that's me.
yeah. And then the second to last thing is I also have my private pilot's license, so and a commercial and instructor license. So I like to fly. I have not done it since being on active duty, really, because it's just been really nuts in terms of just being busy. But so if I can, I like to do that. And then lastly, just to hang out with friends and family as much as I can. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Uh, Question. Let's see. Last question. Yeah. Question number 4. God, I got lost track there. Um, we've shared so many nuggets already, but for the people who are listening to this right now and they're like, well, Nolan, it's easier said than done with your short-term rental. You already got it, and the season went through, and you fixed everything, and you're getting X dollars and all this cash flow. Like, for all the naysayers out there who might be too scared to get into the game right now, what nuggets of wisdom do you have for those beginner real estate investors who are in the military or they're veterans and they want what you
Yeah,
have?
so I would say like if you're one of those like I was, but like who are hesitant about either taking the next step or just taking the first step, the first little nugget I would say is just like for a lot of us who are in the military, across the board they teach a 70% solution today is better than 100% solution tomorrow. And so I think what that really means in terms of being a real estate investor is it's good to have a lot of information because you need that. But if you're waiting for all the information, one, it's never going to happen. You're never going to get all the information. And two, if you wait that next year, because you're like, I'll educate myself for a year, 2 years, and then I'll be, well, by that time, if you would have just did 70% and took action now, you're going to reap so many more benefits doing that than waiting, 2 years until you're ready, right? And then taking off there, big gap there. So I would say learn enough but don't focus entirely on that. So that'd be nugget number one. So and nugget number two is the riskiest thing you could do is take no risk at all. And so you just look at it from like a long term perspective. You didn't take risk at all throughout your entire life, but you just had. And it's not a bad thing. So people might want just the job, and that's totally fine. But at the end of the day, if you did want something more, you spent your entire life and you knew exactly what was coming out of the pipe because you can calculate what your salary is going to be like for 40 years in the workforce, whatever. But now you've risked not having anything that you want in the age of retirement. And so I think taking a risk is actually less risky than not taking a risk. And then the last for the third nugget, I would say always ask for what you want. So don't be shy about really just putting out there what you want or asking. That doesn't mean you got to be, in people's faces or be obnoxious, but just, if you want something, go ahead and ask, go ahead and see it, inquire, because you'd be surprised at maybe how many yeses you can get. And you wouldn't have done that because you're fearful of, I don't want to get rejected, or it's not even worth it because they're not going to say yes. You don't know until you ask. And so one of those, just a really small example is here. I ended up asking ADPI Insurance, like, hey, do you guys have anything? Would you be interested? And ends up like, yeah. So I'm going to be, joining that soon. So, for the cash flow accelerator. Yeah. But that's just a small example. There's others I can give, but yeah. And for real estate investors, if you want to partner with someone, if you want to do a certain program, it's like, just ask because you absolutely never know who's going to say yes. And it could be the changing point in your entire investing career or your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, man. And I love your second nugget about it's riskier not taking a risk in life than constantly evaluating that risk. And then that third nugget, just getting out of your own head is so important. Like we talked about at the top of the show, that mental piece about how those negative feelings and emotions, they ping around in your head and they stack up and they are the catalyst to that flight that so you run away from everything and you stay comfortable, but the real key is getting comfortable being
Yep.
uncomfortable, and that's where real growth happens in that zone. So I can see, Nolan, that you've grown so much just in the last couple years, and you're a great example of a military real estate investor, one of the 70,000 plus who are in our community. And I'm just glad you're here, and I thank you for taking the time to come on the show
I
today.
appreciate you having me. This is a lot of fun, just talking, and I hope this really does benefit people.
Yeah, I think it will. For folks who want to get in touch with you personally, how can they do that, man?
So I'm not huge on social media, unfortunately. I mean, I have them, but I should be more involved. But my Facebook is Nolan Chandler. I should be one of few. Same thing with Instagram. My email address. I mean, I don't know if that's something you can give out. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go
So
for it.
email address is my first and last name combined, Nolan Chandler at sandiego.edu. San Diego, like the city. I check that pretty much constantly because that's where everything goes for, whether it's getting new insurance lined up, contracts. I have a business one, but sometimes it initiates there just with other things. So yeah, check it all the time. So if you have any questions, I'd love to help out if I can, because I mean, people have helped me. So I definitely just want to be able to give back if I can.
Yeah, no, I love that. And guys, reach out to Nolan, shoot him an email. It takes about 2.5 minutes to write up an email. And Nolan's here and he wants to, uh, he wants to help, just like he said. So help him help you by reaching out. Have that one-time courage. Reach out. You never know where the conversation's going to go, but I guarantee that you're going to learn something, and that's the most powerful part of
Right.
networking. Nolan, thank you so much, man. This was a pleasure. This was a lot of fun, and I'm sure we will have you on the podcast again in the near future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin.